So Ian, I'm so delighted to be with you today to talk about not only our favorite topic, but actually one that's incredibly relevant, kind of security, cybersecurity, and how organizations protect themselves. We were talking before we started, as this is the age of cyber threats and threats digitally. And we've already known that with ransomware, the threats are coming from everywhere and taking lots of different form. And now we actually have an armed conflict with Russians' invasion of Ukraine. And now that threat is just heightened. So great time for us to be having this conversation. And one of the things I thought I'd share and get your reaction to is, in the intelligence community, because we know we're a target of adversaries' actions, maybe it'd be useful for me to lay out how we think about security, and then we'll build on the conversation from there. I think one of the things that is kind of a pro tip that I can share from the intelligence community is we think of it as a three-pronged approach to security. There's physical security, how you protect your physical assets, your personal security, how we invest in our people and how we get them invested in security. And then the technical piece. I think too many people try and do the whole solution technically. Because we do intelligence for business, we know the threats we're facing are integrated, so we don't try and just protect from one direction. We know that there'll be using people and using very different entry points. And I think the other thing that we do, because we're so serious about security, is we don't allow infinite personal preference. We control our environment really pretty well in terms of what devices people can use, where they can operate. I think that really showed itself to be a strength security-wise, but a limitation business-wise during COVID. So that's our picture. How are we doing?
So, I've worked with the various folks in the intelligence community over a number of years, and it's always a pleasure to work with, because you guys really understand security, and I think one of the key things is really understanding what's important. What are the threats that you're actually trying to defend against, and then how do you identify the crown jewels, and then let's put real effort around that. And then these things which are perhaps more secondary, then it's how do we stop, if something does go wrong there, how do we stop it from escalating into a bigger problem? And I think it's that sophistication of understanding is hugely important. It's a lot of enterprises, perhaps until a few years ago, used to think of security as buying some products and deploying them, and then you were done. But I think there's now this realization that you do have to do the threat modeling, understand what it is you're trying to protect, the various tiers of assets you need to look after, and then isolate them. Get this segregation between them, and make it such that there are gates to moving between the different levels in the hierarchy and the stack. And I think as you mentioned, COVID, that certainly many of the organizations on the IC side that I work with, the thought that they might have to work from home was just never considered in the plan. I mean, it must have been a period of intense change within the community. What sort of solutions were how prepared was the community to be able to for everyone to switch to working from home from with very little notice?
If I think about the kinds of needs that they had, is how do you get access to the data you need? How do you protect new endpoints? So I don't think that this notion of needing to work other than in your primary location is going to go away. So where's that going? I mean, how are we making progress on securing all that environment that you need to, the whole end to end of where you're operating? then I guess everything from supply chain knowledge all the way to the actual action. How are we doing on that? I mean, is that an area where we're seeing real growth in terms of the products and the approaches on the market?
Yeah, well, I think, that is the extreme transition from, only being able to access data from a skiff to then being able to do it from home and, doing it where you can't rely on protection coming from the environment, where, the endpoint device that the user's, sitting in front of has got to be far more autonomous in the way that it defends itself, and that so that you can still get that level of visibility into what's happening. And I think that's been really interesting, seeing that transition. I mean, enterprises certainly don't want to be responsible for the security of their employees' home networks, and but the thought of all of these various IoT devices scattered around the house, many of them with microphones in them. I mean, it is a major concern, but or perhaps one day will become so. But now it's really a case of with this device off the corporate network, it's not getting the benefit of the protections that were being provided at the perimeter there. You've also got in that home environment, I think, a particular challenge for enterprises where, if that device is in their home, it's going to get used for a lot more personal stuff. When people were being homeschooled, perhaps the kids are in front of the device clicking on things for some period of the day. I mean, there's a lot of activities happening, putting that at increased risk. And that's, I think, been a big challenge. And it's going to continue. This, we're not going to go back to how we were for sure. And there's, I think, now an expectation from employees that they're going to be able to continue doing those kind of activities. Obviously, in the IC world, there's a bit more control and expectation around how people are going to behave. But it's certainly, I think, must have shifted quite a bit in that direction.
Yeah, well, so now it's, as you were talking, I'm thinking now it's kind of put the IC in the same situation that companies are, right? So if we weren't aware before, we're certainly aware now that everyone, that the government is not the only target of adversaries and competitors who would advance their interests. And so the intelligence community is dealing with the same thing that businesses have been dealing with for a while. How do they protect their distributed networks for a while? So what's your favorite development coming along that's going to, protect not only America, but protect individuals and our interests? What's coming?
So I think some of the key things are around applying some of the sound security engineering principles, which have been known about for many years, actually, really since the 70s. There's ideas of least privilege, strong identity around users and devices, mandatory access control, and fine-grained isolation, which are these sort of set of techniques which have stood the test of time, and that we can actually use to build purpose-designed secure systems. But of course, that's not what we're using every day. We're all using these operating systems, whether it's Windows or Linux, that have their roots in the 1980s, where people weren't thinking about applications like a web browser that would go and download. I click on a link, it downloads content from 100 different servers of unknown trust, and does processing based on that content. So they're not really designed to be doing that alongside having some classified document open. And the fact that something that could go wrong with that web browsing session that could then result in compromise of something that I actually care about, and that's what happens today. That's the root of all of these problems that we're having. So I think it's building into systems the ability to isolate what's happening between these, the things that I don't care about and the things that I want to protect, and then the things that I really care about, having additional levels of protection in. And there are, techniques which are now being applied to the network, collectively under this sort of term of zero trust, of segregating access to resources. But those, security principles can also be applied to things like the endpoint, so that we're using virtualization to ensure that we're segregating what's happening in a web browser from the Word document we have open. So if something does go wrong, it's not game over. We haven't lost. We haven't put everything at risk to watch a cat video. That's isolated. It can go wrong. We can recover from it. There's not the opportunity to escalate that and turn it into a bigger problem. So I think it's those kind of techniques which are getting away from the way that a lot of security has been done, a bit of detection based, of trying to spot bad things happening and then blocking them. And right. There's so much variety and bad things that can happen that you're always behind the game with that. It's really designing security in from an architectural point of view so that when things go wrong, you're mitigating the threat. You're rendering the threat harmless, containing it, preventing. Ideally in a situation where there's nothing to steal, no way to move laterally, and then no way to persist. And at that point, you've rendered the threat harmless. And so that's how I think that going forward, we're going to actually start getting on top of some of these issues rather more than the whack-a-mole approach that we have done.
Yeah, kind of the risk, understand your risk, understand what there is a way to lose nothing, and that's to do nothing. Right. And so that's impractical in the way that it's going. And so understanding your risk, what you can't lose, protecting against that, and then resilience, right? You're just going to have to. I totally agree. I think for so long we both expected a magic bullet and we were using the mode approach. And now I think we have to be a lot more thoughtful. But I think that goes back to kind of where I started, which is an integrated approach. Not trying to just have a magic bullet, not just allowing your IT staff to carry the whole burden, but actually have this a much larger conversation. So two things exist now. One is an executive order from President Biden, and the other are NIST standards. Talk about whether those two things are moving us in the right direction from kind of a collective defense.
I think that certainly working collectively, obviously there's been work to sort of share threat intelligence, amongst organizations, so that all helps. But as some of these things, some of the requirements around reporting, all of these things are bringing, are raising the visibility of what's happening. And, ultimately, so much of so many of the attacks we see are criminally motivated. It's the money that's driving it, and as with I think with most crimes, it's cashing out that's the hard part for the criminals. And the more that we can do to make that harder by making it more visible, such that people aren't ransoms aren't being paid, or that it's clear that's happening. This is all going to help to make that crime less profitable, and that will drive it down. So I think again, it's not just about the technology; it's how do we actually tackle the whole problem, deal with the social aspect or the human aspect of how they get the money out. So I think there's a lot of good things happening.
Yeah, I think we're moving in the right directions. I think it all comes down to implementation. I think, if I look at, again, the intelligence community as an example of a industry that knows how important security is because it knows it's under attack, there are still things that are left to be done there. Better sharing between the organizations, and in your environment, making sure that we don't fall prey to the same thing that every business falls prey to is, I bought that package. Am I keeping it up to date? So I think it's a daunting moment, don't you? But I think it's a hopeful moment too, where we really are making we are much better postured, I think both individually and collectively, than we were 5 years ago. What do you think?
I think we are. I think in some ways the stats look horrible.
They are.
But we are, I think we're better prepared going forwards, doing the right things. And, at the end of the day, we're dealing with the fact that, there are many years of legacy. So many of the problems are to do with the design decisions that were made in the 80s and 90s, where security was not front and center of what people were worrying about. And, I think as an industry, we're clearing up mess faster than we're making new mess. So, that's positive.
That's probably a great place to end, because otherwise we're going to be talking for the next 10 hours and, someone's going to bring a big hook and take us both off the stage. What a great topic, and what a great time. I think there are lots of tools, lots of opportunities, and still lots to clean up.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Ian.